Hello, and thank you for joining us for the final session of the Pieces of Systematic Review with Margaret Foster, the 2.0 series. I'm so glad everyone could be here today. Margaret, at this point, probably needs no introduction, but I like introducing her, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little more about her. She's the Associate Professor at Texas A&M University and serves as the Systematic Reviews and Research Coordinator at the Medical Sciences Library with a joint position at the School of Public Health. Her work with Systematic Reviews began more than a decade ago while completing her Master's of Public Health. In her current position, she provides consultations for researchers in medicine, public health, veterinary medicine, education, and other disciplines, and has published over 30 articles applying or describing systematic review methods and evidence-based practices. In addition, she's a co-founder of the Medical Library Association Systematic Review Special Interest Group and developed a popular continuing education course about systematic reviews, which has trained over 1,000 librarians. I'm so excited to hear from her about the last part of the Pieces series. Hello, Margaret.
Hello, and good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
You sound great.
Okay. So I think I might actually be at 2,000 librarians trained or have taken one of my in-person classes. So it's exciting to watch those numbers grow over time. So today we're going to be talking about the last part in the Pieces steps. And so I just have a couple of slides here at the beginning. One, you get to see my lovely picture there. And then this is the book that Sarah and I wrote that's specifically meant for librarians there. And then this is an overview of this series. And so here we are at number 5. And so through this series, we've been following the way that we laid out the book and follows that Pieces acronym there. And so I tried to leave some time here at the end where hopefully we can answer any burning questions that you have as we go through. So here's the agenda I worked up for today. Thought it might be fun, like we did last time, to do a couple of questions and see how we're doing. I know sometimes I use a lot of jargon in here, and just see how everybody's doing, a little personal check of yourself there. And then a little bit of a recap on what we've talked about so far, and then we'll get into the writing up of the report. I'm just going to talk a little bit, thinking back to our case studies, and then I'd like to end the day just kind of describing overall concepts and things to consider in running your own service. So here's the first question. You can go ahead and just write the letter that you think best answers this question, and we'll kind of get an idea how everybody is doing there. Okay. Yeah, so this is looking pretty good. Some of you picked B and some picked C, and both might actually be just fine as far as answering that goes. A lot of times people will do the risk of bias appraisal before coding. Sometimes they'll do it at the same time. And then with this question, I was also kind of getting at that screening is usually what people refer to as title abstract screening, and then selection is when you're actually looking at the full text. So good for there. So here's the next question. Okay, so we're getting a lot of B's here, and so that's good. I meant for C to say both A and B, but I put the wrong answer there. So Prisma is actually just a reporting standard. So you can't actually read Prisma's guidelines and learn how to do a systematic review. Although there's definitely, in how do you report it, you see a lot of conducting. An example I like to use for my clients is I explain that Prisma says you must tell us all the databases where you searched, whereas a conducting guideline would say you need to search Medline and Embase and these gray lit places and so on, like the Cochrane standards say. It's a common misconception among my clients, so I thought I'd do that one. And here's the last question. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of C's, and that's great. I hear lots of different things from my clients when I try to ask them, like, what do they think about a scoping review? And so I've heard different things. But really, for a scoping review, we do hope that people are doing a comprehensive search and they are describing the processes. I don't think that they're actually any easier. So, okay. So that's the end of those questions. I just have a few slides here. I thought we'd go back over a few of the summary kinds of slides I had across all of the process here. And so I thought that this was a good slide to represent the first part in the planning stage when we're helping the client to consider what is their question. This is a great article to look at because it breaks down the review types, the frameworks, and it also provides examples of questions that match that. I think as medical librarians, we've been so programmed to focus on the PICO, and sometimes people just try and fit everything into that. And so it's nice to realize that there's lots of other frameworks out there, and you really want to match the framework to the review type. So I see a lot of PICO questions with my clients, but my second most popular one would be the PO one, and that's where you might be looking at risk or benefit or kind of what's the relationship here between this exposure and these outcomes for this population. I'm starting to get more prevalence incidence kinds of questions, things like that. So hopefully that table is handy for you. So I provided the reference there. And then we also went over in that first session these 5 steps that I use to help me determine, is that question a feasible question? And I keep going through these steps until we get to something that we think is feasible. And so this is where I'm listening to their question. I'm trying to figure out, hey, what type of review might that be? We could scope it this way. Has anybody else done that? And so you just kind of keep going through these and trying to put that together. So that's what we covered in the first session. And then during the second session and into the third session, we talked a lot about the search process, and we took a look at the Meeker standards and talking about what expanded searches are required by Cochrane. So the Meeker standards are from Cochrane, and so that's good to have that on hand to look at when you're working with your clients as well. And then for our third session, we focused on the evaluation part, and this is how I broke that down between the screening by title and abstract, the selection by full text, Then before you get into the appraisal and the coding, many times they need to look at the citation they've collected, and they need to get it down to a list of studies. And so sometimes one article equals multiple studies, and sometimes one study is written about in multiple reports. But when it comes down to it, you're just going to be coding that study. You don't want to double represent any one study. If they're including lots of study types, then they need to also break this down by study type. Many times people will combine appraisal and coding together, but sometimes people choose to do those steps separately, sometimes because they're planning on kicking out articles if they don't meet a certain criteria during that appraisal, so there's different reasons for doing that. And so we talked about different tools that they could use for doing that. And then last time we talked about coding. I tried to go over some different things which you, as kind of a little bit of an outsider there in their project, could talk to them about, showing them examples, tools that they might use, and I use Google Form, and just in general, like good data management is the main thing there. And so today we're going to be talking a lot about writing up the report and what your potential roles could be in there. So I'm going to break down the report and talk about the different roles that you might play in each section of the paper. I'd like to also talk about authorship, because that's a question I get asked a lot, and so that's what we're going to talk about first. A little bit of some tools that you might consider for the selecting a journal, for the flow chart, so that kind of thing there. And then we'll get into running this service before after that. So in authorship, y'all have asked me questions along the way as we've gone through our different talks here about authorship. And you'll hear this from many, but it's really important to have that discussion towards the beginning of the project with that team. Some choose to use a memo of understanding. Others will have policies printed on their LibGuide page or some other form that they're working with their client. I think the most important thing is to do what you're comfortable with. I have been fine with just talking to my clients about it and bringing this up. And I also have examples of times when I've said, that's okay, you don't have to make me an author on this. So, so lots of different situations can happen. There is sometimes a difference across disciplines in what they consider to be worthy of authorship. There might be some different expectations there, but I like to tell them what my expectations are and to see where they're at, so we can just see, are we on the same page? So to do that, I was going to show you the criteria I use here. And so this is from the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and so I put their link in there. And these are the 4 criteria that they list for an author to meet. And then we're going to break this down as well. So the first criteria is substantial contributions to the concept or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data. And many times when people talk about librarians' work with systematic reviews, you'll see them relate that to maybe what a statistician might do. So a statistician might not be there at the beginning, but maybe they come in during the analysis part. So there's that nice or in there breaking down at which point you might be added in on the project. The rest of this goes into different parts of the writing process. So the first part is drafting or revising the work, having final approval of the version, and agreement to be accountable for that, okay? The one thing that I really like about this group is they say it's not fair to deny people completing any of these criteria if they've done the first one, and we'll talk about that in a second. But here I just kind of broke down looking at that criteria and thinking about the roles that you might play. And so in that criteria 1, which this group considers to be the most important criteria in here, many times I'm involved in actually framing that question and getting it scoped right and figuring out which type of review makes sense here, what are the processes that we should do. Then sometimes they've already figured that out and done a great job, and so I might only be doing the second part, which I don't mean that only in a bad way. It's just that's where I got, where I was added in. And so this is that searching and retrieving and the management of the data, all of those kinds of things. Many of the clients that I work with, I'm actually doing both of these. So I easily can fulfill that criteria 1. And so I just have some further detail. This is direct quote from this organization here. And what they're basically saying is, while all authors should meet those 4 criteria, if you have done the first one, you shouldn't be denied the being able to participate in the other 2. And so it's important to know that they shouldn't hold over you. Well, you didn't help in writing it. Well, if you don't give me the opportunity, I can't, right? But I've never had any true arguments with anybody about this. It's usually been a very easy conversation. There have been times where the discussion has been more around, well, where should I be at on the list? Should I be at the end? Should I be somewhere in the middle? And many times it's been very fair. I've never really felt, oh, I shouldn't have been there. But what I ask them to think about it when this has become a question is to think about the role that each person played in the formation of this project, because it's not solely about the writing of it. Without all the backbone of pulling the articles, getting it framed right, working on those steps, you wouldn't really have that much to write about. So I hope that this part here is helpful. Are there any questions right here? I can stop here for a couple minutes and see if you want to ask me. Okay. Well, if y'all think of any questions on that, we can come back to that. Here I wanted to kind of show some different types of reports that you might get out of a project, starting with that protocol. There are the Prisma P standards now for how do you write up a protocol. You can register your protocol in Prospero if it has a health-related outcome. And so mostly your protocol, that's going to involve your introduction and your methods. And then for the preliminary report, which is probably presented at a poster or conference, you can look at the Prisma for abstracts. And then this is going to involve the intro, the methods, the beginning of the results. Maybe they just looked at Medline, or maybe they just looked at the first 500 citations retrieved, something like that, and maybe a little bit of the discussion. And then, of course, the peer-reviewed journal, you're going to have all the parts of the paper, and this is when you might look at Prisma for systematic reviews or the Prisma guideline that's specific for scoping reviews. From there are 2 other types that they might think about presenting. One is like a public summary. This is something that they might get in, maybe it gets published on a blog, maybe there's different kinds of magazine kinds of things out there. I'm going to show you an example from The Conversation, which is used by many universities now, or they might make a YouTube or something for a presentation. It's just another way of getting the word out there, and this is going to focus less on the methods and more on that discussion, more on just here's the findings, here's what we're seeing kind of thing. So that hopefully gives you a nice idea of different ways that they might be reporting on this. I just have a few tools in here that you might think about in helping them figure out where to select a journal, and I'm sure that there's many of you who have other great examples of tools to use. I just have a few things in here. So this is Think, Check, Submit, and it kind of goes over thinking about, is this predatory, is this an open access, all those different things. It has some questions, some links for them to think about. So this is one example. Another that I use a lot is JANE, which stands for the Journal Author Name Estimator. And so in here has a little box where you could write in different words from a title or abstract. So I put in systematic reviews and information retrieval methods, and so it gave me some journals that I might consider for that. And then what I like is you can click on Show Articles, and you can see some related articles to your topic, which is why it put it up at the top of the list. So I'm sure that many of you have used this tool before. Sometimes they don't know what a predatory journal is, and so I've taken a little bit of training on this. And so sometimes they might write to me and say, hey, do you think I should publish in here? And so I'll try and give them a list of things to look for, things like that. This is from this one website. I'm sure that there's lots of others out there, but I like that it has some things to look for. They also on this list have a list of fake metrics. So these are metrics where they're trying to say, hey, we're really high up in this metric, but it's a completely made up one. So I just saw one the other day, it said Cosmo impact factor or something like that. So there's lots of those out there. So really, in working with somebody on a systematic review and going through to this part, you get to use all those other topics that we get a lot more exposure sometimes than our client does, and help them figure out about their journal. And so this last slide is just about open access. Sometimes I'll have questions about that, and they'll want to know what should they think about. We do have some funding through our university for open access, and then we belong to different groups to help lessen those fees. And so being able to provide that for your client at this point is really good to know. I'm kind of removed from that department on campus. They're on the other side of campus. So I have to actively make sure I'm paying attention to their website and ask them questions. So just putting this part out there. Okay, now we're going to get into the outline of the report and talk about the different roles that you may play in these different sections. And so in the introduction, this is where they need to have a section talking about related reviews, and I usually end the introduction with a research question. Sometimes the clients will get really confused in the introduction part, and they'll think, oh, I need to do a lit review of my topic, and they'll want to include in that lit review the included articles that we have in their review. They don't really want to do that. It's not necessary, and it's confusing to the reader. So what you really focus on in this lit review part of the introduction is going to be just a brief introduction and focus on the other reviews that have come out before. And sometimes there are no systematic reviews on that topic, and then, so I suggest that they focus on any narrative reviews that have been written, and that way they are showing that they did go and look for reviews. Then they can say, and because no systematic review has been done on this area, this is why we chose to do it, that kind of thing. And then we get into the methods, and this is what we think about the most when we're working on systematic reviews. And so I'm going to go into the sections there that you might focus on. We'll probably have less work to do in the results and discussion, but I do have a few slides highlighting the parts and the role that you might take there. So let's get into those sections here. One thing that sometimes I'm asked to do in helping them with their introduction is when I'm looking at the related reviews and I'm seeing issues that that review had with their search. So I'm kind of helping them and doing that critical appraisal of the related reviews. Something about, okay, so this review, they only looked at Medline, that's a big publication bias, or this review stopped searching 6 years ago, there's a lot more new things. So it's kind of things like that and helping them to really critically appraise those and put their, show how what they're doing is going to be different and hopefully better too. So probably just a minor role here in the introduction, other than I look to see, are they citing a bunch of stuff they already included as well. So the method section, this is where I think we focus on our role here. Starting with the eligibility criteria, the main thing that I look for is I suggest that they use the framework, so either PICO or PO or something like that. A lot of times when they first do their draft of the eligibility criteria, they kind of jumble up everything together. They might say, oh, we were only looking for things in the U.S. in English or something first, instead of saying their population, the intervention, those kinds of things. So I just talk with them about how to order that. We're going to go a lot into the search process and what needs to be written up there. For the rest of the processes, mostly I'm just reading those sections to see, are the methods clearly described? Can I understand what they did? And so I'm just trying to help them put their best foot forward there. And so guides that, of course, we look at here are the Prisma guidelines. And then there's a new Prisma guideline that just came out not too long ago that is just written up for how should you describe the search. And so I have some slides in here to talk about that. So the current Prisma checklist, when you look at their structured summary here, so that's number 2 on this list, it goes into what should be in the abstract. And as far as the search itself, they just list data sources. And then when you look down in the methods for number 7, this is where you see they say describe all information sources, and they give a list of things that they want to see there, including the date last searched. When we look at some of the updated ones, you'll see they also want to see date last searched in the abstract itself as well. Just that gives people like your cutoff date quickly. So in practice, this is what I've normally done. I list the key databases in the abstract, and I list that start and end date for the search. And then in the narrative, I list the resources with the interface. I describe the search overall, and I'm going to show you an example of that, focusing on which concepts were included. I don't try and give a list of all the synonyms in the narrative. I always try and just refer them to the figure or table that we're going to have. You want to especially make sure you describe any limits that were applied and any of those additional search strategies which we talked about. So here are a few examples. And I'm just putting these forward as examples, not as exemplary examples here. These are just some things I found when I was in PubMed Central to show. I especially wanted to show a little bit about how they're just putting in concepts searched, not necessarily a big long list of terms, especially on this first one here, the preclinical studies. And the second one, it started off great, but then they have this long list. That's where the ... is there in that second paragraph. But mostly I think they did a good job of kind of summarizing it here. The bad part about just putting in a big long list, and this is a really typical thing that you see, is that as a reader you have no idea how they were actually searched, how things were combined if they just give you that long list. And so you'll see for both of these examples they have given the full search strategy. Let's see. You can see a little bit in here that was done beyond the database searching. So both of these talk about looking at the reference list, but you don't see a lot more about gray literature searching in either of these. So then Prisma S came out, and this has a lot more detail about what they would like to see in the search reports. And so I've kind of broken it down into sections in here. And you can go to the checklist and the elaboration document here. It's available through the Open Science link there. So here in this first set, this is pretty typical what we would see. What are the databases, the platforms, that kind of thing. Because some people choose to search databases simultaneously, which I suggest not doing, but I guess if they are going to do it, then you want to know all about it. That's here, that's a D on this list. And then the second part of the table goes into those additional sources, and we talked a lot about that during the third part of this series. So this is doing any kind of hand searching, did you do citation searching, and here it just gives more details about what should be added. And so I think for the citation searching, here it's saying, did you do that manually? Did you use a database? So a lot of times I use Scopus when I look at citations, but I don't always say that in my report. I might just say reference lists were checked of included studies, that kind of thing. So it's just getting a little bit more clarity there. So I think it's nothing like surprising there. It's pretty straightforward. So here I just put in an example. This is from the Prisma S website. They have examples of all the different sections of the checklist, which I thought was really nice. And so here we can see they're talking more about how did they do their gray literature searches, what dates did they work on. Let's see. And so the little asterisk and the double asterisk here is just showing you which citation I pulled that through. Trying to think if there's anything else to highlight for this. Do you have any questions so far? I think this is pretty straightforward. And you'll have these slides to go through. I think it's the last part here of Prisma S that's going to be the most interesting when it starts getting more into maybe not this one, but maybe the next table. So this is more of detailing more of how did you do your limits and restrictions, what filters did you use, and they're really calling for all the search strategies to be copied and pasted. We don't always see that available. Hopefully that continues to be done. And so this one is pretty straightforward as well. And then the last part, this is where they want to see how did you update your searches, and then who designed it. And so I really liked that they added that in. Was there any kind of peer review process for that search? And then how were things managed? So we're seeing more details in how to do that. Don't know if I have another example there. I don't really. So this hasn't been out for too long. I think we're still trying to learn more about what's expected in there, and by looking at the examples, this might lead to the search method section being a little bit longer, describing things a little better. I don't think it's a big leap from what many librarians have been doing when they write up the search methods, and so hopefully this will let us have a little bit more space in the search trait. It's always depressing when you spend so long on this process and it only takes up a tiny part of the methods section. Okay, so just a little bit here about the results section. Of course, the part that I'm most involved with is usually putting together the Prisma flowchart. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. For the other sections, mostly I just read these over. One thing that I look for in the results section is sometimes if a client hasn't written several papers before, in this section they start to just talk about the included studies one by one instead of truly synthesizing the information. So sometimes I just give them like a little bit of pointers on that. So for the Prisma flow chart, the template that Prisma provides is just to give people an idea of what they're looking for. They don't have to follow that template. I do have a few examples of other styles that I've seen. One tool that I like, I list here at the bottom, is the Prisma flowchart generator. It does give a really different style, which I'll show you in a minute. But what I like about this page is that I can get the flowchart in multiple file types. So once I had a client who was trying to publish in a journal that wanted the flowchart to be in this last one here, this vector markup language, and I had no idea how to do that. And so I was glad when that's when I discovered this. So hopefully that is helpful. So here's a few kind of examples. This one that has all the different databases broken down, so it's like PubMed and CINAHL and PsycInfo. This is kind of like what you would expect to see from the Prisma flowchart generator, that website I was telling you about, so it's a kind of a different style. And one thing that you'll notice here is that at the title abstract stage, they don't have any reasons why they kicked it out. They just are giving what they kicked out. You will sometimes see at the abstract stage people giving reasons just like you see here under the full text. It's not required that they do it at the abstract level, so I just talk to them about that when they're starting to work on that, and it's just something to think about. But I do like to show my clients at some point in the beginning what the Prisma flowchart looks like so that they have an idea what they need to collect and decide where they want to be. For both of these, they chose to break down the results by database, which I think is actually nice for the reader because there may be a database that they didn't realize was helpful for their topic. And so just trying to show some different examples here. Okay. This one, I was trying to show the difference between systematic review and meta-analysis, and that sometimes, depending on the analysis, they might have some different numbers down at the bottom. Sometimes they think that they should only do the systematic review, where we're looking at the qualitative part, on those that are also going to be included in the meta-analysis. But usually people will do the systematic review with the set that they can, and then for the meta-analysis they might have to kick out some things that don't give them all the information they need, and so you do the meta-analysis part. So I just like to show them that that isn't rare, that it's common. This next slide is an example of a summary that was written for the public based on a systematic review. And so this was looking at pasta, which I love. And so I was interested to see that there was a systematic review had been done on this topic. So you see it's written very much for the layperson. It starts like with questions and has just kind of thinking about what your reader might be interested in, and then getting into a little bit of the details in here. So they say, so we did a systematic review, which means we took these numbers and we looked at this many things, and then quickly it's going to get into the so what of it. I like to use examples to show them of things they might write up, and what this does is it helps to lead the readers, especially those that might be citing their paper, back to their peer review paper, so it helps them to get more citations. But also that really important thing, which probably they wanted to do too, which is reach out to the public. This is from the Conversation, which many universities subscribe, and faculty can go in and be authors there easily. And then from here, these articles can also get picked up by the major news groups. And so I know we had a lecturer here in the library. He wrote a paper in the Conversation with several faculty members, and that ended up getting picked up by many news outlets. And he got an interview. I can't remember which news, was CBS or NBC or something like that. Anyways, it was very exciting a couple of years ago. And I had never really heard of the Conversation until he started telling about this process that he did. So the last part is the discussion area. And here the major part that I will play is in the limitations section. And so this is where it might just be one or two sentences where I answer the question, how confident are we that all the studies have been identified? So if they wanted me just to limit to English, I can write a sentence about that. If for some reason I couldn't convince them not to limit to peer review, I'll write a sentence about that. If they measured this using the funnel plot, then they'll have some sentences about what that means, but you can only do that with a meta-analysis, and that's a pretty rare thing there. Oh, PBS, sure. I can't remember where our lecturer was interviewed, but many universities and many like at your local PBS station, they might have a way that they could be interviewed by maybe a local group there. Actually got interviewed by our PBS local station, and they asked me about systematic reviews, so I have like a 5-minute interview with them, kind of describing what I do for the layperson. So, okay. So now just a kind of a quick summary, just like maybe 5 minutes here, going back to the case studies that we've been using. So that first one, that was a scoping review, and we were looking at diabetes, adolescents, and depression. And so this is just a quick overview of those scoping review steps. We worked to help them identify their question, find the studies, talked about their study collection and charting the data, and finally bringing up the report. With the scoping review, the main thing is for them to be able to say, what's out there, what have we done, and what are we missing kinds of things. And so when I would go and look to see, hey, what journal might you consider for this, I used Jane here and could help talk them through. I can't remember, and I'm sorry about this. I might have said, I think at one point I talked about maybe this was a book chapter or something. You know, your clients can sometimes change where they want something to go as well over time, and sometimes halfway through I'll have them say, oh, I put this in for a conference, and so we've got to get this, hurry up and get this done. I will always encourage them for their conference, don't try and finish your whole systematic review unnaturally early, like forcing everything through. Just give them the preliminary information. Pick some group, whether it's 100 or 200 citations worked all the way through to where you have 3, 4, 8 studies that you coded, or maybe it's just, this is just from Medline, whatever it is. At this point, I would also talk through the client, what role do you expect to play, and hopefully they've been paying attention to the Prisma document I gave them on scoping reviews. This may be a chance for us to revisit that, and then usually they'll start sending me like a few sections that they want me to look at. The other case study that we had, we were focused on a systematic review. This was looking at diabetic patients, physical activity, and depression. And for this one, it was a systematic review, so we actually worked through all the steps, including the risk of bias appraisal. This is an actual project that I worked on, and so I helped them with that appraisal more than I would normally have. And then they wanted to, we got the protocol published. They presented at a conference, and then we got it published as well. And so I worked through that whole process there. And just going through these case studies, do you have any questions about them specifically? Anything here that I could stop at? Otherwise, we'll get into the running a service. Be so quiet this afternoon. Do I require a protocol submitted before I work with them? I don't, because I help them to create the protocol. I know that some services do require that. And, you know, everybody has to figure out what's best for them. But most of my clients wouldn't know how to create one. They'd have to, they would need a lot of help to do that. And so that's what we do in our first 3 or 4 meetings together. I keep giving them things to work on to finish that protocol. Some of my clients, their protocol would be meets the requirements for Prospero. So it's a systematic review. It has human health-related outcomes, and so we do submit it there. But I also work with people who are doing things just in education or engineering or something like that. Yeah, you know, I was trying to find a really good poster for you, so that's a good question. That's what I spent this morning. I was looking through some different posters, trying to find a good example. So I'm sorry I don't have that. That's a great question. There was a paper, and I tried really hard to find it, where they had taken some published systematic reviews and turned them into more like flyers or kind of like infographics, something better for, easier for the public to understand. I thought that that was really good. I'm sorry, I don't have, I'll keep poking around, see if I can find something. Yeah, so I do use what Prisma asks to be put into the abstract, and so that's a great way to go. You really need them to boil down things. I don't think the poster is the place necessarily to put their search in there. I think it's a great place to have their definitely, you know, the databases they search. You could have like what concepts did you include, things like that. It's definitely the place for their results to shine if that's their focus, or if it's their protocol, a little bit more about that process. So just depends on which stage they're presenting. So I thought we would end up our talk today talking about the systematic review service, And this is going to be, more about what I do and a little bit about that. I thought we might start with a couple of questions here about the trends in systematic reviews. So I recently put together some more updated tables. So let's see what you think here. How many systematic reviews were published on average in PubMed? What do you want to guess? So some A's, a lot of B's. Okay. So here is the chart. So I decided to make this because I was thinking back to when I saw an article several years ago, and they had estimated about 11 a day back in 2010. But when I looked at it, I found 25 a day. So I'm not exactly sure how they estimated that in that paper. And it's grown greatly over that time. So you see a really sharp increase, three times as many as we had 8 years ago, basically. So if it does seem like more people are asking to do them, they are. How about this? What about scoping reviews? How many? Oh, I shouldn't say per day. It should say for the year. Sorry about that. This is for the year, not per day. Need to fix that. Oh, so we're kind of getting answers all over the place here. Okay. So it's some variations in there. So here is the trend. So I first started hearing about them probably 2011-ish. It was the first time a client so this is how many scoping reviews were done in PubMed in 2018 here. So you see that this has an even sharper increase. So back in 2010, by searching for scoping or mapping review, I saw 32, and in 2018, 905. So really big increase. So I just want to show you two more charts here about some trends. This chart is looking at other types of reviews, so not systematic reviews. So this gray part shows the scoping. The yellow part is integrative. The red is realist, so that's a little bit. And then this last part is narrative. So you can see from here that narrative reviews continue to be published. There's still, people are like, oh, should I even bother with them? We still see them being published. There's still a place for them. But we're definitely seeing a really sharp increase across the others. And then when I compared what percentage of reviews compared to systematic reviews these other ones were taking up, we see a big change there as well. So in 2018, 10% of these other reviews made up the total of their reviews. So I don't know about how many had a librarian as a co-author as far as the as scoping reviews go. I don't think I've seen any research on that. And sometimes it's really hard to tell, was a librarian a co-author? Sometimes that's a tricky thing because you have to read so much into it. I'm hopeful that with the new standard for reporting searches that they're saying, just say a librarian was involved, that we're going to start to see that more often. But it's not always easy to tell. And I have this last one. Because I do systematic reviews outside of medicine, I was curious what I could see from here. And so the orange here is engineering, the yellow is social science, and the green is agriculture. One thing I'll say about social science, the really tricky thing there is that a lot of times they don't call a systematic review in the title or abstract, even though once you start reading it, you would say that's what it was. It's just not part of their standard. And the same goes for engineering and agriculture, but I just see even more often in social science. So the main thing to see from these trends is none of these searches were perfect. You know, I just did, hey, does it say systematic review or meta-analysis in the title? And those are the ones that I took. But you can definitely see the trends that are happening here, and that it's not just going across medicine, but across all of these other fields as well. Have any of you worked on any systematic reviews outside of medicine? What are some of the topics that you've worked on? Or disciplines? Social work. Oh. I found that working on systematic reviews in animal science and in veterinary can be really difficult because what I expect to see in the report is not always the same as I would see in human medicine, so some things were much more difficult. For example, one review I worked on, it was really difficult to tell in the abstract if it was randomized control trial, and so we just had to let everything go through into the full text sorting, and then even when we were there, sometimes we had a hard time figuring out, is this a report of a randomized control trial? So Barbara, you got a big list there. I've done several in education, and there's a tricky thing there too. I had to learn some other study types I hadn't heard of before, like single case study, I think is a term they use, which is different than what we would mean in medicine by that. And then engineering, I have so much to learn more about engineering databases. I don't feel like Compendex is my friend. So I would love to ask you, Naomi, if you have any pointers on searching Compendex, because I definitely don't enjoy searching it. So I came up, these are some of what I've seen and what I consider reasons why we're seeing this big increase in reviews. We're seeing a lot more call for evidence-based research by policymakers, by the public, and there's just so many more primary studies now than ever before. So there's a lot of studies to study. There's more software now available than ever before. And maybe this is true. I did have a researcher say, I don't know if we're really getting better at this, the technical skills there. There's more professional organizations that are promoting systematic reviews, sometimes through funding or standards or, hey, here's a database. And then we're also seeing more standards being developed. So there's many more extensions for Prisma than there ever has been before. We're seeing more like in social sciences and other areas starting to develop standards. The other thing I was thinking about when I was thinking about training librarians is how many that I talk with, and sometimes they have like this imposter syndrome feeling that, oh, I don't know that I have enough skills to really help somebody with a systematic review. And I would say that I can show you lots and lots of reviews that are published where the search wasn't done very well, where all of you could have helped that person. Because this is kind of what I see happening a lot. Our researchers kind of fall into that Dunning-Kruger effect where they think they're great searchers, but they're not. And so we've got to kind of meet together in the middle part there. And this is where I really suggest being great collaborators on reviews, that together we're always going to make design the best search. And just in meeting with your client and talking with the issues, you can really work out a lot of that. Another question that I get asked a lot is how to avoid doing too much work. So one thing that I'll hear sometimes from people is, oh, you know, I worked 4 or 5 hours on their search and I never heard from them again, and things like that. And everybody has to decide for themselves how they want to work this out. And some systematic review services have decided they're going to do that by requiring that a protocol is submitted, because that shows that the researcher is pretty committed to this, that they finish the protocol. And I think, you know, that's a fine way to go. I won't do a lot of other searching until we have developed our protocol. It's just I help the people develop the protocol. So I stage the work that we're going to do. I'll only do as many database searches as they keep coming back and asking me for them. I don't spend a lot of time outside of meeting with them in doing that, unless it's with faculty, unless I'm like, okay, for sure this is going to go forward, I will give them this much more time, things like that. So you really have to decide for yourself what you're going to be comfortable with in this idea of the sweat equity. I would say that this took me a while to get used to. I did a lot of things in the beginning of doing this where I would work hours and hours on things and just making them right. I'd like to think that wasn't all wasted work, that I learned along the way, but I don't know. So in thinking about your role, there's different roles you can play across the processes we've been talking about. So I think we've already talked about this a great deal. This is just kind of bringing it down to back to the pieces, steps. And I kind of adapted this based on McGowan and Sampson's article, where they were thinking about roles that you could play. Can I comment on Institute of Medicine standards versus Prisma? So for that, you know, Institute of Medicine standards came out several years ago. I think Prisma has been updated more often than their standards are, and you haven't seen widespread adoption of Institute of Medicine standard versus Prisma. I still like to point to ILM standards as far as it says to involve a librarian, but there are also other standards that call for that as well. But Prisma was last updated, I want to say 2014, but maybe I have that wrong. Maybe it's 2009. But they're about to come out with a new version. And so I think the Institute of Medicine kind of visited this once, and they haven't really gone back to look at things. 2009 was the last time when Prisma was updated. I can't remember when Institute of Medicine came out. Here's one more look and thinking about your potential role, 2011. Thank you. So maybe they are more updated. Maybe I'm wrong. I think that Prisma is the more accepted standard, but I do really like that Institute of Medicine did call out librarians there. So here's another look at thinking about different roles of the librarian that I've used before. And so this was written several years ago, and I think it still holds up today. I think most of us would feel comfortable with literature searcher, reference manager, document supplier, although I don't want to be the sole one looking at that. I put that back on the client. But as you get more comfortable with these steps, you might move into these other roles. And so I have found myself in all of these roles. And so it's just something to think about when you're doing this, that as you grow in doing this work, you might consider expanding into another role. And you can also do systematic reviews on your own on topics that you're interested in. So I just finished one that's going to be published in ACRL, I'm not sure when, where we applied some Campbell standards to some education reviews. And so there's lots of roles that you can play in here. This is how I break down my service and my roles that I work with clients. The first, that's where I'm just your librarian. You came in, you needed a search. I say, here's some results. Maybe I only see them once or twice, but I don't deal a lot with them. So I'm just a consultant there. Of course, I do a lot of instruction, presenting classes and workshops. I'd like to, if I find out that a lot of my clients are coming from one class, I like to go and talk with the instructor and find out what's that assignment whenever I can. Of course, they're not always open to this, because I'd like to find out what is it that you really want your students to get out of this, because asking them to write a systematic review in 6 weeks, it's just basically going to be a lesson in frustration, especially if that student understands what you're asking them to do. And then the last part, and the part that we've been talking through this whole time, is my work as a collaborator. So I'm working on a review project. We might be writing grants, or maybe I'm leading that project. And so in thinking about this, I also think about my clients in different ways. So I thought I would kind of do this breakdown here for you. So the first part is I think about those clients that are consumers of systematic reviews. This is when I go and talk to the medical students about how do you find, read, and apply a systematic review. Then there's those potential producers. This is where they get 45 minutes on, hey, here's all the different review method types, and here's how to think about which one is right for you. Then the actual producers, this is where I might do more of like a boot camp kind of review day where we're focusing on finishing up their protocol. And talking with faculty, they may be at different levels. It may be that they're looking to give a class assignment on this. They may be looking for funding for their project, other things. And then when I get up to the administrator level, this is where I'm more focused on funding for reviews, the impact that reviews can have, that kind of thing. So I think about all these different clients where I'm advocating for systematic review methods in very different ways. This last slide kind of shows the things that I think about when I'm talking with them. See, do you have any questions about this? How could I focus a systematic review? That's an interesting question. So if I'm submitting a grant, but for the grant they want some kind of like a mini systematic review, is that what you mean? Yeah. So in that case, it would depend on how much time you have for the grant, for the grant submission process. It would depend on how much time you have. You might consider looking at some rapid review methods. That's where you, maybe you don't try and go through 20 years worth of stuff. Maybe you just focus on the last 5. You might do a more specific kind of a search. So you probably couldn't do like a major systematic review in there. My boot camp slides on how to do how to guide people through a protocol, I do have those. We could put if you go to my LibGuide, which is on this first slide here, I do have a section on my LibGuides with some slides in there. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on what I called that section. Just a second. Give you that. And I'll put the link in here just a second. On my LibGuide, I have a section that's called Workshops and Resources for Librarians. And from this page, you can see all these videos that I have here, as well as instructional templates and some other sources in there you might be interested in. So hopefully that is helpful. Also thought I might show you some things that I keep on my small bookshelf that's by my desk. I just took a class from Sarah Bonato. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name correctly. That was really good, and she has this new book that's out on searching the gray literature. I found it very useful. I especially like the part talking about how to really efficiently search Google. It also made me feel better that my really strategic way of searching the gray literature was okay. But I definitely learned some new places, some better ways. I'm definitely not the best at finding clinical trials, as I just don't get that many questions focusing on them, so hopeful for that. I really like Booth's book. It's the one I suggest most often for my clients because it has looks at reviews from lots of different disciplines. It has a nice chapter there on qualitative studies, which is not something I know a lot about. And then, of course, I had to throw in Cochrane and JBI in there. So we have this last 15 minutes together. I tried to leave some time in here so you could ask questions about anything. Let's see. What do I think about spending lots of time? Okay. So I do understand Liz's point that it takes a lot of time going into these other thesaurus terms, into looking at thesauruses and other databases. So I think about what is the quality of this thesaurus. So I think PsycInfo has a good thesaurus, CINAHL does. Sometimes I search academic, search Ultimate or whatever they're on now, Platinum or something like that from EBSCO, and they don't have a great thesaurus, so I just use my keywords there. So what we're really trying to do when you're looking at those thesaurus terms is you're trying to make sure for every concept that we're searching in all the places in that record that could possibly help us to find things. So I really kind of just weigh, is it worth it or not? There's definitely some that I don't bother with their thesaurus. So I hope that helps. They submitted a protocol. So did it get kicked back, the protocol? Did the protocol got kicked back? Okay. Sometimes clients come to see me because they've been working on a review and then a review comes out that's really similar, things like that. And so this is where they might need to adapt their perspective, their population, things like that. And it's not always an easy thing because they've already done so much work to get to this point. That's why it's really important at the beginning to go and look at all the ones, but sometimes stuff comes out while you're in the middle of working on one and you're like, oh, where did this come from? And that can hit you. So if there's some other perspective they could take, I had one group where the systematic review that protocol that had come out was focused only on randomized control trials, so they decided that they would take also include qualitative, and they kind of changed their perspective a little bit, that they would be looking at it from the perspective of the patient. So it's really dependent on your topic and if any of that makes sense. Oh, you want to see an example of an engineering systematic review? I'm trying to think of the easiest way to show y'all something from there. Just a second. I'll paste in a link to my scholars page that lists my publications. You might look at some of those. Most of the ones where I have my crossover with them that have been published, it does cross over very nice and neatly with medicine, so most of them are health-related topics. I have been working on some that just haven't been published yet that are more in the engineering realm. Working on a few right now about automated driving. I don't think that any of my purely engineering ones have come out yet. So I do have a couple of articles that are talking about the state of systematic reviews in engineering education. So you might consider that more education than engineering. So I guess it might just depend on how you where you want to put that. Any other questions? You're welcome. Maybe I left too much time here at the end. I wasn't sure how many questions you would have for me.
Well, it looks like there's no more questions right now, Margaret, but I'm sure people will be reaching out to you later if they do have questions. Sure. Oh, we have one more question in the chat there.
Let's see. How many systematic reviews am I handling at a time? I need to do that. So last year I did over 500 consultations for systematic reviews. I probably have 200 open reviews right now, but you know, they're coming to me at different times and some people might not come back to me and things like that. So I really just take it as they're coming in the door. Now there's some where I'm running the review or it's for a grant and I have to keep those down to a smaller number and I've got to protect my time for that. But it is something that I've really been thinking about and probably need to work on. So there are going to be, I'm working with Sarah Jewell. We're going to have two webinars on systematic reviews from MLA coming out in, I think it's August and September. That one's on troubleshooting. And I have been talking with Sarah Miles here at NNLM about possibly next year, next January, starting and talking more about instruction that we do on systematic, that I do on systematic reviews. Let's see. Can you email me questions later? Yes. Yes, I have had issues with Rayon with no author. I don't know what's going on there. Lately, what I've been doing is I've been exporting into RoughWorks first, getting rid of the duplicates there, and then move them over. Let's see, for the book, I think the easiest way would be to order it through Amazon. I never am great at selling myself, but I think that Amazon might be the easiest. So did I miss any questions? I think I got to all of them.
I think you covered all of them, Margaret. And if those are,
Okay.
if those of you wanting Margaret's contact information, our Pieces page does have a link, I believe, to her LibGuide as well as to the Amazon book entry. So if you want to find that, it's also on our website.
Oh,
too.
yeah, I think it's on there too.
All right, so I'm going to say at this time, if you do have any more questions, please feel free to contact Margaret, or if you don't remember Margaret's contact info, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to put you in connection with her. Margaret, I want to give you a huge, huge thank you. This is a wonderful series. I'm so happy we could partner with you to offer this for everyone, and looking forward to future series as well.
Well, thank you, and I always learn so much from everybody, and thank you all for your questions. And I know Sarah has a few questions to ask you before you go, so thank you.
I do. Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and then we'll move into our final housekeeping. So if y'all could stick around for just a few more minutes, that would be great.